record as well. Thank you to everyone who is joining this evening. My name is Jonathan Cohn. I chair the Issues Committee here at Progressive Massachusetts. Had planned to have the two guests I'm delighted to have on here today, City Councilors Julia Mejia and Michelle Wu from Boston. And it became an especially fitting conversation given that earlier today, Governor Charlie Baker announced the kind of phase in of what he wants for, let's say, a quote unquote reopening for Massachusetts. So it kind of creates a kind of a wonderful kind of backdrop to discuss how good or bad is what he's proposing. What does it leave out? What's been happening in kind of in both Boston and the state so far, and what do we really need to do to make sure that the kind of recovery and reconstruction that we see address the systemic inequalities that we know too well, rather than reinforcing them. So to start off, I want to thank both of you for joining. And can you both just quickly introduce yourselves for people? I'll let you, whichever one of you wants to go first, can go.
Michelle has more experience. You go first, Michelle. I'll follow your lead.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much to Progressive Mass for the invitation, the consensus building machine, as I like to call it. I'm one of his hugest fans. So, and so excited to be here with my colleague and sister in service, who is just amazing. Like, you would never know that this is your first however many days it is now, you know. It's been incredible serving alongside Julia and seeing the work that you're doing, the issues that you're raising consistently, and how you've already started to change what everyone is thinking about on the council and how we talk about issues. So it's been really fun. I'm now serving in my 4th term on the Boston City Council, and eager to be part of this historic new council that is has broken a lot of barriers for the first time in history as of last election cycle, largely in part thanks to groups like Progressive Mass and all of your local chapters who make sure every election cycle isn't just about who's running and what names are on the ballot, but what issues everyone's talking about and how we are going to create this accountability and new political ecosystem so that we're all in it together moving forward. So happy to be here.
Awesome. I'll just give a quick shout out to both of you for having been endorsed by, let's say, JP Progressives and Progressive West Roxbury Rosendale back in like last election cycle, which feels like so long ago, but wasn't at all.
Yes. Thank you, Jonathan, for inviting me to be a part of this conversation, as well as Progressive Mass and everyone who's tuning in. And I also want to give a shout out to Michelle Wu. Yes, I am the newbie. I feel like I still have my training wheels on, and it's just been great to be in service with people who deeply understand these inequities and are being loud and bold about what we need and championing that conversation. So really excited and humbled to be serving alongside you. And yeah, it's been over 100 days, and I feel like I'm building the plane while I'm learning how to fly it, and I'm learning my job description as I do it. And but I am deeply grateful for the opportunity to serve during these times, and looking forward to being engaged in this conversation today.
Awesome. So I do want to get to later the fact of like the kind of governor's announcement today, but before we do that, I'd like to hear from both of you. What has the city council been up to over these in these like past couple of months? What are some of the things that you both have been advocating for, or that you've been advocating for with colleagues, that you think are like some of the ideas that the city has either already adopted or really needs to embrace in the months ahead?
Yeah.
You go first, Julia. Go for it.
Okay. So for me, when everybody started talking about flattening the curve and social distancing, I was Googling all that just to understand it. And I felt like, you know, one of the things that we have been able to do on the council is really push the city in terms of not just language access and translation, but also making sure that things are culturally competent and that we're talking to people in ways that they can understand it. And that we're recognizing our own privilege in many ways, and access that we have to resources and opportunities that a lot of small businesses may not have. And so really pushing on issues of access, accountability, transparency, and making sure that people have food, access to food that's culturally competent. It's not just about feeding and giving people a box of food, and if you don't know how to cook with those items that you're given, then you're defeating the purpose and sending people off in the hunt for food. It's like the Hunger Games. So really pushing the city on their food access program and making sure that it's culturally relevant. So that's one thing. And then the other piece that I can talk about is that the council has been really good at looking at language access. We just had our first of a kind hearing on Friday, this past Friday, where everything was translated in English, Haitian Creole, Mandarin, and Cantonese. And it was the first time ever that there was live interpretation happening during the council. And that was, under the leadership of President Council Janey, who worked with the central staff to help us make that happen. And so I think what we have been doing, and I said, I'm going in there to not do business as usual. And I feel like, the coronavirus and COVID-19 and everything that has happened since has really pushed the council to think differently about the level of engagement and the type of space that we create for people who have traditionally not been engaged. So our Zoom calls. I think a lot of access has been a lot of the things that we've been championing as a council. And Michelle, you want to talk about some of the other policy, other things that we've been doing that are cool too?
Yeah, no, I think in some ways, as Julia was saying, we're doing things differently a lot because we have to, because everyone has to, but much of what we were doing, we probably should have been doing all along in terms of finding ways so that people didn't have to come in person to participate all the time. And so there are pieces that I think will be able to, like, just in terms of how the council's operating, that should be now the new standard, right? The hearing that Councilor Mejia was talking about, that she didn't mention that she chaired and organized and put together and sponsored along with Councilor Flynn, that is the new standard, right, for how we should be thinking about language access for all of what the council is doing. I think what I've loved about the council as well is that we're trying to draw connections between what's happening in the immediate crisis and what was already crisis before for largely communities of color and our families who have been so resilient but underrepresented and in policy conversations and at policy tables. So how do we make sure that as we're now sort of magically finding the ways to do things that people always said couldn't be done, right? Like immediately stabilize people in their housing situation and stop evictions and, find a way to deliver a Chromebook to every single Boston public school student who needed one, and food, even though there are still some gaps in terms of cultural sensitivity, but we're basically operating at a whole new understanding of what's possible for government to do if we actually decide that we want to confront a crisis. And so now the question is, okay, we're here not just because a virus and this germ sort of emerged into the world. We are here the way that it's affected the world because of poverty and inequality and climate injustices that our communities were absorbing the whole time. So how can we fix those crises? And I think there are a lot of ways that we've been using the platform of the council to really push these issues, and then to put in place changes that will help, yes, now in the immediate relief, but also moving forward.
Yeah. I was going to say one more thing too, is that for us, I know none of us are interested in going back to normal. What we want to do is move forward, knowing that now we know what is possible with political will. Now we have that expectation that things are going to be different moving forward. And I think once you show what is possible, then we have something to hold others accountable to that standard. And I think that it's going to be a lot harder for folks to say, well, we can't. I'm like, oh, you can, because we did it. And this is how we did it. And this is how we're going to continue to do it. So that we can hold ourselves accountable to that.
And let us hold the, this is there's a lot of plane building and flying at the same time right now at all levels. And, much of it is outside our control. And we look and we're frustrated at how the federal relief dollars have gone down, and, not even almost just a fraction of the relief going to businesses owned by people of color, for example. how do we make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable at the city level for what we can control? So, you know, we'll get into all the specific things that we're partnering on, but one of the things that's really, really important is this effort that Councilor Mejia and I and Councilor Arroyo have been pushing around what does an equitable recovery look like, and specifically, how have the city's own relief funds, you know, the 3 big funds that have been set up and are providing rental assistance and general sort of resiliency support and small business relief, where are those dollars actually going, who's getting them, and where the process is set up so that we can make sure, you know, in any future rounds, we are making sure we're meeting the areas of greatest need and not just kind of first come, first serve, or whoever got the lottery number because they knew to apply.
Yeah,
I
or
want to ask
things changing at the last minute and then coming out in one language and then a few days later getting them the other languages, and by the time the people apply for it, those funds are no longer available. Yeah.
I want to probe more on this in a sec, but the talk about like technology and expanding access just reminds me of like what it was like to watch a council meeting back in like 2013 or 2014 when it was still on that, like you had to like download something onto your computer.
Flash.
Yeah, it was like kind of like some flash thing that you had to download, and it would like probably crashed a decent amount of times. And wasn't particularly technologically savvy. So having like streamed Zoom council meetings is an impressive technological upgrade across over the course of the decade.
And we all know how to mute and unmute ourselves by now in the process.
But here's to what you were saying about like, what have you been seeing so far in the oversight that the council's been doing about making sure that the money from those funds, and if you can tell people a little bit about what those funds are, and about making sure that those do end up going to the people who need the support the most.
So I think it's a number of different things. One is hearing directly from the people who are living these realities, letting us know how difficult and challenging it has been for them to go through the application process, and oftentimes not hearing back. And so a lot of it has just been just having our ears on the ground and listening to folks. We hosted a hearing around this issue as well, where we got to hear from business owners. Unfortunately, as it's been the case for other little things, you know, no throne, no shade, but I'm gonna keep it 100%, is that oftentimes the people who need to be there don't show up to the public hearings. And then we just are speaking to ourselves. And so that's been a little bit of frustrating on our end too, is like, you know, the people who have access, the people who are in positions of power, and the administration and things of that, and folks in those capacities have not really been engaging in some of our public hearings. And I understand that people are busy and there's a lot of stuff going on, but it does make people feel a certain kind of way when not full participation is happening in some of our hearings around some of the issues around equity. And when we're doing a deeper dive on things that are race related, there's been some sense of absence from what I've seen. But regardless of that, I think we continue to hear from folks on the ground and then provide feedback to the administration and provide feedback to the different departments who are running this. I mean, I'll tell you, I applied for the rental relief fund. I'm an exponential learner, and anyone's gonna, because I knew my phone was gonna blow up. So I needed to go through that process to figure out how do I fill out this application. And I put in test form, like I created a fake name. I created some fake numbers, like, you know, and they were asking me all these questions about how much I made and all this. So it was all a big lie. And I ended up passing the screening process. And then I got an email saying that, you know, I passed the initial stage and then that I was gonna get followed up on. And then I ended up on some wait list, right? And everything was in English. And so just the whole system, the way it was set up, I knew they learned a lot and we were able to give them some feedback. And that's part of round 2, hopefully, that we'll learn from those things that we could do differently. But the fact that I made it through as someone, then I was providing technical assistance to people who did not know how to read or write in English or in their native language. So I was on the phone filling out the form, helping people directly. I just don't think that it was really equitable to begin with. And so I think we've learned a lot since then. And my hope is that the next go around with these funds, it'd be a different story. And that was the same with the rent. That's the rental. And then in terms of the business, it opened up and it closed like this. And by the time people got word out on the streets about it, it already had closed. And so, and also it wasn't in multiple languages either. And so this is a city where we have over 111 different languages.
Wow.
We need to be really super mindful that businesses are operating in our city that don't know how to speak English. And I think that in terms of equity and recovery, and that's why we've been doing so much work around language access.
Mm-hmm.
Michelle, come on, you
yeah, no, I know. I'm trying to decide how much to
Go ahead.
I think what I'll say is it's frustrating. Just the entire approach is frustrating. And I'm not, it's not about like ill will or poor intentions on anyone's part, right? Everybody is in this to try to do everything we can in the moment to help people. There's so much need out in the community. But when we're starting from the very premise of we don't have enough to go around, and we know that, okay, so let's find the least painful way of dividing this up. Like, we're never going to get to a way of splitting way too few supports that feels good, right? It's just not possible. And so whenever we have an application-based process, there's some amount of like, how did you find out about this? Did you know someone? You had to like be in touch with some information source. You had to like get a call, or you were on this Zoom for a community meeting and then you heard about it, so you applied, but that means you had internet and you were, on the meeting in the first place. So, I always like to kind of, dream big, right? Like define what is, in a world without constraints, what we are trying to do, right? How many businesses are there in the city of Boston that had to shut down to in the name of public health and public safety, that, through no fault of their own, they were just trying to make sure people were, and their employees were safe. We know we could figure out what that number is. We could figure out how many of them, for example, are tenants of the buildings that they're in versus owning the buildings. And then let's see what that number is. How many of those are Black and Brown owned businesses, right? How many are, businesses of a certain size? And we have all the data sources to figure out kind of where the need is greatest. And let's start there in defining what the need actually is, as opposed to, what can we try to cobble together and then figure out a way that feels defensible in how we split it up. So, and a lot of that, as Julia was saying, is about being, having the people and the communities who are most affected right there saying, helping define what the need is and how to solve that. So I'm glad, there seems to be at least this coming together of an understanding that, now at least we don't need to explain how much inequality and inequities were in the community. We don't need to explain how all of our health is how each person's health is connected to every other person's being healthy, right? You can't function in your life if you can't get food because the grocery store is not stocked because the workers there didn't have paid leave or protections, and therefore they're not able to get it, or that they had to take the tea and the tea is now running on reduced hours, even though that crowds people together more. So again, I think it's about what are we going to do with this moment and how do we make sure that we're actually trying to define what the problems are and not just kind of, try to patch up here and there.
Yeah.
I think you both kind of touched on the rental relief fund that the city has, and I think it also speaks to the fact of how housing insecurity was such a major issue in Boston to begin with.
Yeah.
So I remember seeing recently about like the number of kind of how much need there is and how few people got stuff in the first round of that. But the fact that so many people need that speaks to a larger problem in the city. If you want to talk a little bit about like what we need to be doing, whether in the short term, but also in the long term, to address the housing insecurity that's grown, especially in the past few years in the city.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have the opportunity to rethink so much of what had not been working, to like fully acknowledge that it was not working for most people. And what are we aiming for? You know, I personally think that we need to move towards a sort of, you know, a system where housing is not a capitalized right, asset, right? That at a certain level, we can guarantee that people have shelter over their heads. And that in our current structure would mean Boston Housing Authority, rethinking what their mission is and how they go about it. And it's maybe no longer just about the maintaining and preserving the large-scale developments and sites that we have and programming and supports around that. But how are we thinking about scattered sites, or when a particular housing unit might become distressed, that the city or the public entity can make sure that there's a way for that to be an affordable unit. I think we see the need for tenant stabilization now more than ever. Can we actually have the legislation move at the State House? It was great that there's now the evictions moratorium, but that's not good enough. That, okay, it just means that then at some point when people deem us sort of recovered and reopened enough, then everybody's going to come knocking. I think we have to, you know, really, I'm not going to go back to, I feel like I'm just sort of pounding old drums constantly, but how we do development in the city does not lead to equitable outcomes, does not lead to community-centered prioritization of what should happen. So we need to abolish the BPVA and move towards a system where we're actually engaging community in what every neighborhood should be, and then making that the rules instead of negotiating developer by developer. We're seeing now, right? Construction already opened up, and I've already heard from a lot of folks who say this major project isn't something that fits our neighborhood, but now we're removed from having the ability to protest, right? To show up or to even give feedback in a lot of cases, but construction's starting back up again. So we're gonna have to see new, you know, how we can use new ways of bringing people together to make sure that we're still empowering people to be part of this conversation, even if it's virtual.
Yeah. Yeah.
Julia, I want to chime in for a sec, but one thing that I just want to quickly mention, that I've always been amazed that when the Boston Redevelopment Authority did its total rebrand and landed on the BPDA, which sounds like it's the name of the police union. That has always amazed me, that they spent so much money and that was the name that they came out with. But Julia, I'm going to be able to go to you.
I still call it the BRA. So
exactly. The agency formerly known as the BRA.
Yeah, it's Prince all over again. So I share the same sentiments as Councilor Wu. I do believe that what I have heard and what I have seen and what I have already known, I think we all have, is that there are a lot of people right now who are living 9 to 10 or even 12 people in one apartment. And we have seen the impact of that, right? In terms of the rate of transmission among our most vulnerable communities, right? So we know that the housing situation is interconnected with public health, that is interconnected with, with everything that we're experiencing. And so I have also have said that we need a community-centered approach to the planning. Like, I'm tired of developers coming around my way, presenting me a plan that's already designed, and then asking us to think about it and provide some feedback. I think that we need to flip that concept in, and it has to be designed with the civic associations, with the people, with the abutters, and say, here's a lot, what do you all think? And let that design process be led by the people. Because then it feels as though we're not an afterthought, right? So I think that we need to flip the whole concept in its head in terms of development. And then I also, what I do know is that I know that the Office of D&D, I'm still learning all of these.
It's like an alphabet soup of city government.
Yeah. So I hope I never get a pop quiz, because I will.
There's no quiz at the end of this talk.
But what I do know that Chief Dillon, she came from a housing space, and I know that her department has been working really hard at making sure during COVID-19 that we have rapid response, that we're looking at vouchers, that we're looking at ways to help make sure that people who are who need to quarantine, that have a space to do so safely. So, you know, considering the times that we're in, I do know that that specific office is trying really hard to address this issue. I think what this is going to be the silver lining, and I guess the blessing in disguise, is that this moment in time right now is going to give their office, I'm hoping, the resources, both financially and also the political will to really think about housing stability in a whole new way, right? At least that is my hope, is that we'll be able to do that. Whether or not I will see it this year, I don't know, but I do hope, and I am hopeful that that given these times and what we've been able to see in terms of the rapid response, that is something that the programs and initiatives that we'll be able to scale further, I hope.
And thinking of when it comes to like housing and housing stability, I know that like the issue of homelessness has been large percent. I forget the stat, but I remember seeing the striking stat about what percentage of Boston public school students are kind of experiencing
5,000.
Well, yeah, experiencing homelessness, and it's like, what has the city been doing, and what should it be doing that it isn't currently to really address that? Because if we want people to be able to shelter and kind of shelter at home, they need a home to be able to shelter in.
Yeah, the response in terms of our community of residents experiencing homelessness has been it's been really scary to see how at risk people have been. And you know, I think the statistic from maybe a little over a month ago at this point, when everyone who was sheltering at Pine Street Inn one night was tested for COVID exposure, and it was 1 in 3 residents there who had been exposed. And you know, I think more recently across all shelters there's been more testing available, but you know, it's vulnerability to underlying health conditions and you know, sort of historically congregating in closer quarters at some of the shelters. So there's been a lot of practices now to give more space and to make sure there's and again, some of the things that maybe should have been in place all along in terms of standards of access to hand washing stations and hand sanitizer and all of that. So I think the city has worked very, very closely with our partners. There's a daily call with providers and separate medical facilities set up so that residents who are experiencing homelessness can quarantine. You know, if you have been exposed to someone, you need to isolate yourself so that you don't continue to spread it. But when you don't have, when it's difficult to find a space that's your own that you can do that in, you know, we've had to step up and are now creating those extra spaces. Some other cities are even going beyond in a way that I think should be an inspiration to us, where, for example, San Francisco has now had an official act by the city where there are certain hotels that were now unused that have become housing for people, right? That have become that space that anyone who needs access to a place temporarily to quarantine or sort of in the medium term can use. And that's how we have to think about it, is that what should drive our decisions is public health and community stability. And that hasn't always driven our decisions in terms of communities that are often invisible in policy.
Jonathan,
Yes.
are we going to be able to talk about other issues that have bubbled up to the top? That we could.
You're welcome. You're welcome if you want to.
I keep talking about housing, but I want to talk about one thing as it relates to the situation that we're talking about, but that has a different layer of some of the things that we've been hearing.
Yeah.
Is that poverty is traumatic. And when you don't have a place to live, that's going to increase your level of stress. That's going to impact the way you react to certain things. And I think these things are interconnected. And one of the things that we've been hearing from a lot of folks who are experiencing housing and food insecurity and instability is the level of trauma and mental wellness that is impacting the whole family, right? And I think that that conversation is a part of the housing conversation.
Yeah.
It might not be something that we can just write a policy about, but I do know that it's an issue that we're experiencing out here, and that is worth us talking about.
Yeah.
All of these things are interconnected, and I think that in the housing conversation, that level of instability is terrifying for a lot of folks who don't know about when they're going to get their next check.
Yeah.
And so I just want to uplift that as some of the things that we've been hearing out in these streets is that what COVID-19 has done is also made it harder for people to act like these things don't exist. But poverty, I've always said, you know, racial issues around race are really important and dear and near to me, but we need to also make sure that we're talking about the intersection of socioeconomic status and race collectively, because we have come across a lot of folks who are living in poverty, who already living in poverty, now feeling an extra layer of emotional distress as it relates to what they're experiencing, and housing instability is real.
Yeah, that's definitely true. It reminds me of like kind of all the studies that talk about how poverty is like is a mental tax, and it's a tax on people's time, and especially kind of in a situation like this, both of those get exacerbated, and I could see the effect being especially severe on school children who are dealing with kind of a highly unstable and like where stability is so important for young children as they develop, and suddenly you've just kind of shot through any of the kind of the stability, kind of this what they were used to.
And if you're living in a house with 9 other people and you have to learn during remote learning, and you can't find a little place for you to squat and listen and learn and pay attention to, like, the housing conversation can't just be about how we're going to make more affordable housing. The housing crisis and the housing conversation as it relates to COVID-19 has to be how it's impacting the entire family within the constraints of what we're dealing with. And I think the mental distress around poverty, I also think about remote learning, and kids have to share the space. They have to share sometimes the computer that they're using. All of this is further making it, you know, widening the achievement gap, if you will, during this time. And I think that is also something that is not closely related to housing, but it has like an after effect. So it's relevant, you know.
And I think it's an example of how different issues are always ultimately connected and can't be looked at in silos.
Yeah, well, I think a related issue also is, you know, the deep concerns for residents who are experiencing domestic violence right now, and situations where the home may not be safe for adults or for children. And that's not going to be just sort of an on-off switch where, you know, everything will be sort of quote unquote better when we get to a reopening. As we are phasing in this sort of new reality, there's going to be a transition where many sites will continue to be limited, right? We're seeing, as of today, we learned that likely certain businesses will, you know, for example, houses of worship are at 40% capacity. Certain businesses will be at small, you know, childcare will be at more limited capacity so that the kids can stay apart. We also, you know, it will very likely be that shelters, both for domestic violence and for sort of emergency overnight purposes, will be at limited capacity. And then how are we going to find the extra spaces then that organizations or that we could provide supports to make up some of this lost capacity? I mean, this is going to require a lot beyond just saying, okay, here are the new rules. Like, you need to stay 6 feet apart from people and be at 50%. It's like, okay, where's everyone going to go now? Because whether it's in that kind of situation or on the T, right? Like, we weren't able to space apart before, and it's only, you know, it's going to get, returning to quote unquote normal service levels isn't going to cut it. So we have, this is about an infusion of resources in many different ways.
And if we're going to be wearing masks. I'm like, even that I told Marty, let's not talk about it being masks. Let's say face coverings, because everybody can understand that language. And if our new normal is going to be that we have to cover up, or I guess you get like a fine in a certain space, like $300 if you're not covered. That's also a financial tax on portion,
Yeah.
right? And so we have a responsibility to be able to communicate this to folks in ways that they can protect themselves and protect the larger community as well, which is why I keep talking about the cultural competency piece of it. It's, yeah, we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, because it kind of like, you don't just need like a specific like repurchased mask to serve that purpose. Like anything that you would need will probably cost money, but people, whether it's like scarves that people have or bandanas that serve the purpose, and making sure that people understand that all of those things count, and then make sure that they can get what they need.
Yeah, especially if that's going to be the expectation. That
Exactly.
moving forward, every space that we go into, we have to walk into that space knowing that this is the new norm, right? And I think that that's going to be part of our training and our conditioning. But then I think that we also have a responsibility of making sure that our communication is culturally competent, to say the least.
Definitely. You were talking, one thing that you touched on before is just the issue of education. I'm curious to see, like, what are your thoughts from like any of the hearings that the council has done, or what you're hearing from constituents in general about that? Because I feel like that kind of move to remote learning just doubles down on the inequalities that were so manifest in the Boston public school system to begin with.
Yeah. I would still be in high school if MCAS were around. So I know that for me, with my daughter at home, I become the janitor, the IT, the cook, the paraprofessional, and Google has become my new baby daddy, because every time she asks me a question that I don't know, I'm like, Google it, just because I'm too embarrassed to let her know that I do not know the answer to that question. So remote learning has been really difficult for me.
Yeah.
And then I'm also working from home. So remote learning has been a big challenge for a lot of the parents that we have been hearing from. And I also worry about a lot of the students who were already chronically absent and already struggling at school. Those students are now even struggling even more. And so, you know, I think that we hear a lot from families whose children are not really, who are like playing a game on Fortnite instead of listening in class. So a lot of people are taking advantage of that. And, you know, we're scared about whether or not our children are really being prepared to move on to the next grade. So there's a lot of fear around this gap of that's happening. And then for me, in terms of like all of the hearings that we've been having, like I like people to speak to me in normal terms. Like I feel like oftentimes every time I go into a hearing, I'm like, I don't want to have to go get a translator. I just feel like we need things to be really easy and simple for us to understand, because a lot of parents are getting tripped up with the things that are coming down the pipeline, because it's hard for us to it's like the Da Vinci Code. We have to figure out what is all of this. So I think that has been a big challenge for a lot of the parents that have communicated to our office. And then that's also about the equity piece, right? These were issues that were already happening, and now we're seeing that digital divide, where we have a lot of parents who are undocumented, who are afraid to apply for Comcast, because, you know, the first thing that they ask you for is a license and a bank statement. And if you don't have either one of those, you know, if you don't have a formal ID, then you go to your neighbor's house and use their Wi-Fi. So that digital divide is real, especially for folks who are undocumented or speak another language. And Michelle, I know you've been doing a lot of work in that space and interviewing students.
Yeah, it's been, I mean, I am barely holding it together most days in the like parent teacher side of things. You know, I am scared for the stats on how many times Blaze has made it onto the class to be revealed, right? And sometimes it's with the best of intentions from everyone, but the teacher, you know, the plan's not available until right before, and then she kept trying. She felt like, she was getting hacked. She kept getting too many anonymous requests to view the Google Docs. So then we switched to a new system, which required new passwords and everything. And it was just like, it's a full-time job to try to manage what is happening right now, to make sure your kid is kind of connecting with all what's available, and to make sure they're sitting in front of the screen and engaging with the class. And it's not possible, right? We are asking people to do something that is actually not possible in this moment. And so we're just gonna kind of see where the pieces land on that. And it's important to know how it's going as it progresses. But what's undeniable is that even if we were to get every student, perfectly plugged into internet and a computer and a quiet, safe space at home, which is already just, that's not the case. But even if that were true, our kids would still be losing out on so much, because we're really feeling right now just how much of education is relational, right? It's about that face-to-face interaction they have, not necessarily during class time, extremely important. How a teacher teaches, extremely important, but it's the 5 minutes on their way to lunch where they can pop in and say hi to, Mr. So-and-so, and feel like that adult knows what's happening in their lives. And that's really hard on teachers right now. They don't have that as many sort of casual opportunities to keep up on what their students are doing. We hear it from students too, that, I think on the ones who are a little bit younger are really feeling like they're being forced to grow up so fast. I've had a number of them say to me, I'm basically having to be in college now and manage my own schedule, and my parents are working and I don't see anyone, and it's so much on their young shoulders right now. And then the number one thing they say, the younger kids, is, well, what I worry about is the seniors, right? The students who didn't get to celebrate prom and graduation parties in person, are off to the next phase in their lives. So I think that the uncertainty, going back to the mental health and wellness piece, there's a lot that we're going to need to keep unpacking, and we need to over communicate right now. So as much as we can, even if it's, hey parents, we don't know exactly when school's going to open back up again, but when we do, here's how we're thinking about the protocols for how school will be safe, right? We're going to do temperature checks, or we're going to, clean the school once, here's going to be the standard for how we're going to ensure that there's public health as a baseline. Here's how we're going to ensure that there's sort of some catch up around learning loss. It's just so much that the district is having to take on right now. And again, like every other issue, it's not like things were the model before of how it should happen, right? There were already so many gaps before that. Let's use this time when things are kind of up for a lot of planning, a lot of discussion, to over communicate, to bring people in and make sure that we're inventing a new system.
Yeah. Can I say something before you move away from the education conversation? Is that one of the things too that I think is really important for us to recognize is that we've had this expectations that teachers are just going to continue to do business as usual, and it's all about just the lesson. And I think that we need to create some opportunities for young people to just Zoom and connect. That has nothing to do with lessons, that it's just about them having a space to just be young people and to talk about this transition, and to help co-design alongside their teachers on what this experience could look like if they've had a voice in it, right? I think that oftentimes the same thing that I used to say when I worked in the parent education space is that things were always being done to us, not with us, right? And so I see that also happening to a lot of young people, where we're not including them in these conversations and helping them create space for them to co-design alongside administrators on what this can look like going forward. The other piece of it is that we've been advocating from our office is to create opportunities for young people to even be co-teachers, like for the younger students. And if everybody's talking about people not being at work, why can't we put a little bit of money aside to give, even some parents who know, back in their homeland, they were the math teacher, and we can utilize those parents to help tutor some of the students who don't know how to speak English, right? Like, there's so many ways that we can be innovative in how we utilize people's times during these times that I really am looking for out of the box thinking. And I think creating opportunities for young people, seniors and juniors, to maybe teach middle school, co-facilitate with a teacher, just so that for the level of engagement, that gives a young person a little job or something to do. They can connect with their peers in ways that make more sense. And the same thing for parents, right? I just feel like we have an opportunity to really engage people in these conversations and create opportunities for folks. And my hope is that we'll continue to push for those things. And if we don't get them, then we'll do them ourselves and show what it looks like. Because I don't like taking no for an answer. I think Michelle and everybody has seen that. If you say no, I'm gonna do it myself anyways, one way or another. Just because I do believe that, this is the time for us to be innovative, and this is the time for us to really imagine what is possible. And if we're not willing to take those risks, then we're just gonna continue with the same status quo.
Yeah.
And I think,
I was gonna say, it's time, and it's also, there's the space, right? So much of this crisis is about space, how much space we have between us and other people. And a lot of buildings, streets are pretty empty right now. So what could we, in a perfect world, we should be fixing all of the T's tracks so that they're updated now, and we won't have any more derailments. And we should be getting all the schools that are empty now, the pipes fixed so that we don't have any more drinking water issues. And there's perfectly healthy buildings when students do come back, and not just sort of sanitized, but healthy in every sense of the word, that we were falling short before. One issue we've been tackling recently in terms of space is also on streets, right? This is an area where Boston is a little behind now. We're getting there, and I'm really glad we had a great hearing on this recently. But there's, a spreadsheet that advocates have been making of how many cities have been rethinking how they use street space now, because there are fewer cars on the road, because people need more space to be apart from each other on sidewalks, because more people are not as comfortable in a confined train or bus, and so they're trying to bike instead. How do we use this space that's available? There's 250 cities on this spreadsheet. Boston isn't on there. And, we are approaching the warmer weather. So, it's spring basically. And these issues are just going to get more and more urgent. And warmer weather is also the connection of how are we thinking about our young people and making sure they're developing and growing during the summer. And we're creating the right spaces and opportunities, even as a lot of summer camps are shut down, a lot of sort of work sites that they otherwise would be interning at are closed.
Julia, that's the one point, and that you're just touching on there, Michelle, is so important about how with education, it's not just about, let's say, imparting, not like kind of a one-way imparting of knowledge. There's a huge social dimension to education, and like the social and emotional development and learning that takes place, which where you need to be able to create the space for that, so that doesn't get lost from students. And as well, just to tag on what you were talking about, Michelle, the importance of thinking of like, what are our streets for during all of this time? And you've done a lot with a public transit advocacy or like cycling advocacy, of thinking of like in this time when our streets are much quieter than they usually are, to start thinking of when things start moving back, what should that look like? How can we best structure that?
Yeah. And I was just saying, how can we do that in a way that includes those folks who've traditionally been left out of the conversation, right? Mm-hmm. Like if we're talking right now, there's all these discussions around planting 2,000 trees across the city. Well, how can we do that in a way that is getting young people engaged in that process? And then we're teaching them the tools, or giving them the tools and the resources so that they can learn how to love these trees and understand why they're so important. Like, this is where I feel for us as a city, we have an amazing opportunity to redesign and rethink how we engage youth in these processes. I'm really, because I'm the chair of small business and workforce development and consumer affairs. For workforce development, I want all things that deal with youth employment to also be part of that conversation. I don't think that youth employment should just be its own separate little thing. It should be its own separate thing, but it needs to live within a space where we're going to be advocating for young people year round, not just summer youth employment programs, right? Like, how do we leverage all of the businesses that are in the city of Boston? Right now, there's conversations happening in the healthcare space who would normally employ our young people during the summer, but because we're not sure what's going to happen, how can we refurbish those jobs, still employ them in the healthcare space, but find other ways and other things that they can be doing, instead of just saying, well, we're not going to be able to employ them this summer. No, you have an opportunity and a responsibility to think about creating meaningful ways to employ these young people through the summer, whether it be peer leaders, being healthcare, peer leaders, where they're learning and teaching their peers about physical distancing, where they're maybe doing a research project and collecting data that helps inform. I mean, there's so many different ways that we can keep young people employed this summer. And again, it goes back to, reimagining what is possible, and then bringing all of those people to the table. And I think that that's one of the things that the Department of Youth Employment is really working on right now. They've been convening people across the city and employers and businesses to figure out how they can, utilize the Summer Youth Employment Program. I believe we're still going to run it. New York City decided not to, but we are going to run our Summer Youth Employment Program. And the goal is now thinking creatively of like what that would look like. And I'm really excited that the city has decided to invest in the Summer Youth Employment Program for young people.
Nice.
Really excited about that and what can come of it. As a former PIC student, I worked, I got a job during the summer because I was in that program. I know how important it is. So
yeah,
it's important. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of these kids are the ones who are, helping to, because if their parents are undocumented, they're able to work. So it's not just about working for the sake of working. It's working because that's how you're going to be able to feed your family. That's how you are able to contribute to the livelihood. So.
And Michelle, I think you had wanted to chime in as well.
I think we are just at a really formative time, and whether it's schools, jobs, tea, housing, I everything should be on the table right now to rethink not just what we should do, but how we do it and who's involved in deciding how we do it.
And then I want to be able to also get comments. Earlier I noted about how Governor Charlie Baker kind of launched today his phased reopening of various parts of the economy. I'm curious to hear your takes on that. What's good about it? What's bad about it? What does it leave out? What do we need? What actually needs to be kind of on our mind as that process happens?
Well, I don't have a poker face, and I don't know if
neither do I, don't worry.
That's why I think I don't get invited to any more press conferences, because you can see all this here. So I don't think we were ready to open up in any kind of way. I don't agree with at this point with even the slow open start with various industries. I feel like we're putting our people at risk. I don't think that we have done our due diligence to prepare people in ways that are going to help reduce the spread. And I think that what should have happened is that I'm not going to say that the people who were around that table were not real, but I would advocate and what could have been done differently is that people who are doing the work and living these realities on a day-to-day basis, low-wage workers, like all these other folks who are stakeholders, should have had a seat at the table. Maybe even somebody from the city council, like our president, Council Janey, should have been in the advisory committee. I feel like we didn't have the right representation, which is probably why we're in the situation that we're in. And, I don't really think anything is good about it. So I don't see anything good about it.
I have no reserve of love for the governor. So that is
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to think about something I could say that's positive.
you don't have to. You don't have to.
No, so I think if there was an industry that you could make sure could adapt quickly to safety protocols, right? Construction feels like that's the industry, right? There a lot of the times the sites are outside. You physically can have a little bit more space, and you can, there's already lots of safety checklists, and theoretically, sometimes we don't see this in every site, particularly when the workers don't have protections. But theoretically, construction is an industry where you kind of can build it into the protocols, and that's something that's very that folks are used to doing. I think it's a huge. It falls hugely short in that childcare is not part of this first phase. Whatever time the first phase was supposed to happen, and I agree that I think we're nowhere near the level of testing that it's safe for people, and that we have enough information to just say, okay, go again. And we know that when we're starting from, even though the numbers have come down in terms of the cases and the hospitalizations, that only means that we're back in February if we're going to all of a sudden remove any sort of distancing requirements. And the epidemiologists remind us that if you go back to everybody interacting with each other again and spreading the virus when they don't know they're sick and all this, when you're starting from a base of people where the infection and the virus is actually much more than you were from the very beginning, the second surge has the potential to be higher and faster, right? So it's not enough to say, okay, we're watching the numbers are coming down and now it's okay. It's all about testing, and even the goals that have been set out of, okay, we're going to be at 45,000 tests a day, then eventually we'll be at 75,000 tests a day. If you follow what the public health experts actually say we should do, and they've calculated a number of different ways, either by a certain ratio of how many tests you should be doing compared to the cases that you're finding, or that you need to be able to test a certain percentage of the population that's essential workers, estimated at 40% of the workforce, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Bottom line is that Massachusetts should really be at about 100,000 tests a day minimum to be where we're sort of able to start bringing it down, testing and contact tracing. And so when our ultimate goal in the future is only 75,000 a day, it just feels like we're not responsibly setting the right parameters for safety even. And then my other biggest problem with this is that what people have wanted, everybody understands we're in this moment where things have to change. And so no one's going to be, I won't say no one, but most people get that we have trade-offs here that are happening, but people understand there are inconveniences for public health. But we just want information, right? We want to be able to plan our lives a little bit better, and to say, okay, we're in these 4 phases, but we're not going to tell you what, like, you might be in phase 2 or 3, and we've kind of said that, but we're not going to tell you when we ever move from phase 1 to 2 or 2 to 3 or 3 to 4. That's going to be just sort of quote unquote based on the data, but without any sense of how is it going to be based on the data? What are you looking for? Or are you just going to kind of look around at that point and see what other states are doing and try to do that? So it doesn't, when there's no provisions for childcare, when there's no discussion of how we're going to get PPE to all of the workers that are now going to start going back to work or to houses of worship, it's, even just thinking about the childcare industry, it is going to be a lot of resources that are needed to make sure that workers are safe, much less, customers that are going into these spaces. And I think for me, one of the biggest stressors is, as maybe this is like going, get back to the soapbox, but the T is so fundamental to how this will spread or be contained in our state. If you ask restaurant owners, often one of the top 3 things they'll say to you right now is, okay, we're really struggling. We don't know if we can survive. At least make it so that we can trust that when our workers are coming to work, because they all take the T to get to work, that they can be safe themselves, their families, their coworkers, and our customers. So, it's not like we don't know what we need to do. It just, we're not even setting the right standards for ourselves. We're not even trying to be in the same league as New Zealand, South Korea, Taiwan, right? Where there's hand sanitizer and temperature checks at every, subway station, and where there's mass testing, and, we are beyond the point of doing that. So it's kind of like, okay, given where we've fallen to, and given where we are now, is this an okay plan? Fine, it's okay that construction was first versus some of the other industries, but I don't think we have enough information to even feel like there is a way for people to start thinking about how to come out of this. And I don't think we are setting standards for what should be a world-class city, or the leading state in this or that, when we are in the top 3 of infections. We have had more fatalities in Massachusetts than all of California combined, right? Think about the size of California. And it's not, people are like, oh, okay, well, we're testing more. No, this is fatalities of confirmed hospital, often hospitalizations. And it's not about testing at that point. So we didn't take action early enough on a lot of the decisions. And then we are still, not testing where we need to be.
No, your point, Wonder, a lot of Baker's response seems to be doing some of what other states doing, but later. So like missing the ball, or kind of, he's even kind of the reopening discourse seemed to be like looking at what other states are doing and trying to start that out, rather than whether or not it's where, if Massachusetts is at the right moment for that. Just trying to kind of mimic what other states are doing and hope everything works out well. And kind of the comments that you're both making reminded me of what we've seen in other countries that have already started reopening and then saw new surges. I remember seeing that kind of like, I think in Germany, I remember reading about that happening, where they started opening things back up and then the cases ended up spiking again, which shows kind of the need for like a lot of advanced planning and a very intentional kind of a data-driven approach to make sure that like, as that happens, we don't make the whole problem worse.
And again, go where the need is, not where it's sort of easiest to start, right? Where there will be the least pushback. I mean, it is very telling that all across the world, COVID affects men more than it does women. But in Massachusetts, that is flipped, because we have had a crisis in our nursing homes. And because we have more women on average in nursing homes given life expectancies, I think the rate in Massachusetts is something like almost 2/3, something maybe 59, 60% of our fatalities have been in nursing homes. The national average is about 1/3 of fatalities of a state's fatalities have been in nursing homes. So we are, we're leading the charts in ways that we shouldn't be in a lot of different metrics.
And so I don't want to hold you both too long. So what would be your kind of as we wrap up, final takeaways that you would want people watching now or watching later to come away from this discussion with, or as well as any points you wanted to make but didn't get to make?
Well, I need a haircut, so I'm hoping that this situation.
This is going long.
I think, and I need to wax my face too. Jonathan, I think, one of the things that I have learned in these last 56 days or 57 days since we've been at home, is that we can't lose hope, and we can't lose the sense of urgency in the way that we act, right? And so for me, it's really about striking that balance of recognizing and seizing all the opportunities that exist, while also managing my own expectations about how quickly things move. Like, if I want things done yesterday, and if they're not happening in the sense of like, I don't understand why there's so much bureaucracy. Now I see why things don't move forward and why people get so frustrated about certain things. It's because just the level of bureaucracy just to get from point A to point B, and all the politics that gets played, is no wonder why we're having this conversation in this point in day and age, right? And I think that as a city, and I've always said this, is that for me, it's really about taking this from a collaborative spirit. And that collaboration has to include the people who are living the realities and doing the work, informing, ourselves as policymakers, and then also what role do we play in working with the administration and working with the mayor, and working with our state legislators and working with our Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, like really seeing this opportunity for a real, like a 360 kind of, like everybody has a stake in this. And so I think that the more collaborative we can be, and the spirit of which is more about calling people in instead of calling people out, is the spirit in which we've been operating in, because it's not about us, it's about we, and it's about the work. And I think that what I have seen in this time is a lot of people have rolled up their sleeves. There are a lot of nonprofit organizations, there are community groups. You've seen the thing that, a lot of the work that Monica Cannon Grant has been doing, all of these other organizations, the mutual aid funds, like everybody during this time has given a little bit of themselves to help address these issues. And I think that that is the type of work that is needed. If we're really serious about moving forward, we can't do this in a way that leaves anybody out or behind, right? And I think that all of us play a role in that. And so, we're always learning and listening and creating space to be informed by folks. And so I think more of that is needed. And I think accountability is key, and holding ourselves accountable to what we're hearing and acting on that is what I'm hoping, is just what I'm encouraging people to do as we move forward. But we can't lose hope. And we gotta try to remain grounded and positive during these times, which is what is hard to do, but it's good for our mental health. So yeah, just all try to find ways to get along.
Yeah, I would ditto all that. I think in terms of what I hope people take from this conversation on the policy side, is that decisions should be driven by public health, because it's not the either or between public health or economics. When you do the public health right, when you're in the public health crisis, getting that piece right means getting the economics right? Even if you're saying, okay, restaurants go open, if people don't have confidence that it's safe there, that the workers are healthy, that the establishments are clean and sanitized because we haven't put in place the right protocols and guidelines and public health pieces, then customers aren't going to come anyway, and it's still going to be an economic situation. So I think following the science and the public health first, and remembering that the issues here are really issues of equity and resiliency, and we have the opportunity to fix that. And then on the political side, I would say this is really a lesson that we can do big things, and we just need to marshal the will to do it. That's where organizations like Progressive Mass really come in, because you're able to provide that platform, kind of convene and corral a set of shared values and agenda items and action items, and then you're not just pushing those, but changing the entire political ecosystem. So I'm zooming in from Square Root Rosendale in case anyone could see. It's become, but back when we could go there and eat and gather, it had become the go-to office basically for Progressive West Roxbury Rosendale. And what an incredible transformation that has led to just in this part of the city, with the Ward 18 Democratic Committee and Fresh Slate effort, with so many new local initiatives springing out of organizing and empowering community members here. So I think we all have something to organize around now, but we have to, as Julia was saying, do it in a way that brings everyone in, and also is focused on how we're protecting everyone in the long term.
Awesome. So first of all, thank you both so much for joining. There have been various comments on the Facebook Live that I haven't been able to get to. If you do have time later on and want to go through them and respond to people, I'm sure people would very much appreciate that. There are a number of good ones on there. But I always like to end these asking, if people want to learn more about the work that you're doing, where can they find you online? Like, where should they follow?
Follow me on Twitter. I'm at WooTrain, or we have a website, michelleforboston.com, also on Instagram and Facebook.
Yeah. And with us, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and now TikTok too. TikTok. It's Julia for Boston, FOR, Julia for Boston. And then you can also call our office, 617-635-4217. If people need anything, or if they have an idea, or they want to collaborate, we're always looking for folks to inform our thinking. So you can call us or email or follow us on social media.
And I'll give a shout out to Michelle for the kind of the Facebook Lives that you've been doing, and Julia for the delightful TikToks that you and your daughter have been doing. That have been a great kind of part of this experience. But again, Michelle, Julia here, thank you. Two amazing Boston City Councilors. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing and the work that you'll be kind of continuing to do in the months ahead as we navigate this whole process. And thank you to everybody watching now and who may be watching this later.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you. Bye.